Until recently, I detested ancient Greek theater. Anytime I had to read a play for a class, I found myself in this paradox where I judged the script for both being maddeningly overt and wildly confusing. And I thought this about Greek tragedies despite having an obsessive love for theater, history, mythology, other Greek literature, and the privilege of working with excellent teachers and directors. In the end, I figured we only read this stuff because it survived antiquity. But that's not what I think anymore, and my change of heart came not just from reading the plays, but from understanding the role they played in their society and continue to play in ours. Before I go any further, I should point out that my transformation on ancient Greek theater came from reading Brian Dorries' fantastic book, Theater of War. I'll be citing it quite often in this video, but I encourage you to read it for yourself one day. There's a link in the description if you're interested. It's honestly one of the most moving books I've ever had the privilege to read. So, remember when my former ignorant self claimed that we only read Greek tragedies because they survived? Well, I wasn't entirely wrong. These numbers represent the three major tragedians, Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Euripides. The first number is how many plays we believe they wrote. The second is how many survive today. So it's safe to say we're reading only a small fraction of the repertoire of ancient Athens, and yet audiences continue to be moved, even healed by them, almost 2,500 years later. Wait, how do we know how many they wrote if they didn't survive? Good question, apprehensive student. So the plays were presented as part of a festival, a competition of sorts, and while most of the plays have been lost, the records or ledgers of what plays were performed survive. Okay, enough about history, let's get back to me. A few years ago, before I fell in love with Greek tragedies, I found out I had to teach Antigone. I thought, well, I better figure out how to make this tolerable, or my students are going to want to stab their eyes out with their mother wives' hairpins. But another part of me thought, well, should I even need to teach this? I mean, Nietzsche claimed that it was pointless to teach teenagers tragic literature since they haven't lived long enough to connect with those experiences. But it turns out he's wrong. You don't have to live long in this world to discover tragedy. Who would have thought I'd come off as the more pessimistic one in this pairing? Anyway, Dorries, the author of Theater of War, points out the irony of teenagers finding ancient Greek tragedies so boring. He says, some scholars now suggest that attending the dramatic festivals in ancient Greece and watching plays by the great tragic poets served as an important rite of passage for late adolescent males. It is for this reason, according to the argument, that so many of the tragedies feature teenage characters, such as Antigone, Pentheus, Neoptolemus, and Orestes, thrust into ethically fraught situations with no easy answers and in which someone is likely to die. According to this understanding, tragedy may have been viewed as formalized training, preparing late adolescents for the ethical and emotional challenges of adult life, including military service and civic participation. In other words, the very plays that were designed thousands of years ago to educate and engage teenagers, to help transform them from children into productive citizens, have managed to bore them senseless for centuries. And I think it's this training that Aristotle had in mind when he philosophized his theory on the cathartic power of art. You see, Plato wanted to ban all the artists from his ideal city because they caused people to act irrationally. But Aristotle saw art as a means of purging emotion. Seeing actors play out something tragic in front of you on stage prepares your emotions for when you will one day play it out yourself. But this isn't simply a matter of grinding sad emoji moments in order to take on life's final dungeon boss one day. Dorries makes the type of education the Greeks were after a lot clearer when he states, "Tragedies are designed not to teach us morals, but rather to validate our moral distress at living in a universe in which many of our actions and choices are influenced by external powers far beyond our comprehension." But why are the ancient Greeks so into sad stuff? Well, they also have comedies, but there's no way I could accurately depict those without being demonetized. The focus on gut-wrenching tragedy stems from the acknowledgement that we're all fated to experience suffering akin to it in one way or another. For the ancient Greeks, fate is the most powerful force in the universe. Not even the gods can control it. And like my 6th grade teacher once told me, we're fated for 2 things in this life, taxes and death. So if we're all going to die, what's the point of preparing for it? What's the point of watching Oedipus march toward the world's worst 23andMe results if we all already know what's going to happen? Well, the Greeks understood that it wasn't quite that simple. Dorries again here. In tragedy, the concept of fate is not mutually exclusive of the existence of free will, nor does the ancient idea of destiny negate the role of personal choice and human agency. In fact, as in the case of Oedipus, human choices and actions are required in order to fulfill an individual's fate or destiny. Dorries goes on to compare fate to his father's losing battle with diabetes. I'm way oversimplifying one of the most moving accounts I've ever read, but he sums up his main premise on page 15 of his book when he says, "Type 2 diabetes is a fitting metaphor for the human condition as portrayed in ancient Greek tragedy, and for the interdependence of human action and fate. Those who are diagnosed with the disease often possess a genetic predisposition to develop it. It is written into their DNA, like an ancient intergenerational curse. And yet, what diabetics choose to do with the knowledge of their condition has a direct impact upon their lives and upon those who love them. Thus, in spite of the curse of their disease, diabetics still play a role in shaping their destiny. How they behave and the choices they make help determine the course their lives will take." So when you think about it in that way, all of us probably, like some sort of curse, already have the disease we're most susceptible to built into our DNA, fated to it. At some point, we all have to acknowledge how vast and infinite the forces around us are. We must face our lack of complete control without giving up complete control. We must stare fate in the eye without being fatalistic. The task is not easy, but our training starts on page 1. Happy reading, everyone.